security and being part of the system.
Hello, Walter. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Welcome to my show. I'm really glad to have you, and we could start. As I understand, you had an interesting life when we talk about work. You traveled the globe when you were working and beside work. Now you're an author of some fiction and non-fiction books. Can we start by telling us about your history? Let our listeners meet Walter Bosley for the first time.
Yeah, well, I spent about 20 years in U.S. national security, that community, as we call it, working for multiple U.S. federal agencies. And really, in a way, even though I worked for different agencies, I did the same thing, right? It was counterintelligence, some counterterrorism, but you operate the same way you do in counterintelligence. Before I got into that, of course, I went to San Diego State University and I majored in journalism because from a young age, I was very much a voracious reader. And then I got into movies and writing. And for a time, I thought that's what I was going to do until an uncle of mine got a hold of me and, convinced me how cool it would be to go into this other stuff. But I always in the back of my mind had writing as something I really enjoyed doing, even through all that. So when I finished, years later, when I finished my time in national security, I decided to commit to publishing and writing, and that's what I've been doing now for an additional 20 years. I've now been a publisher and writer.
Wow, such a long time. Yes. What was it like growing up in San Diego? You grew up there, right?
Well, no, here's what's interesting. A couple of months after I was born in San Diego, and a couple of months after I was born, my parents packed up and we moved to West Virginia, where my dad was from. Oh. And we lived there for a little over the first 3 years of my life. And then we returned to Southern California, and we lived in an area which is about 70 miles east of Los Angeles, called the San Bernardino Valley. And
I've heard of it.
Yeah. So we lived there and until 1973, and once again moved back to West Virginia just for 2 years, and then again returned to Southern California to the San Bernardino Valley. And I lived there until I transferred to San Diego State University when I was in college. And so that was only the second time I had lived in San Diego after being born. And I've tried to return there multiple times, but I never seem to be able to stay. Something draws me away, and it's a wonderful place, though. San Diego is just a beautiful place to live.
Yeah, I heard it has a great climate, and it's warm usually, right?
Oh yeah. It's it's cool when every place else is too hot, and it's warm when every place else is too cold.
That's really good. I know you guys have non-disclosure agreement, but can you tell us something you couldn't say, let's say 10 or 5 years ago?
Oh, well, places I've been to when I was in counterterrorism, I had to be real cautious about that before I went and during the years I was going. But I worked all over the world. I would go to the Middle East, Central Asia, Africa, North Africa, Eastern Europe, South America. About the only part in Asia I ever worked in was in the Philippines once, and but that included war zones. I had to go to Iraq during that conflict, and Afghanistan multiple times. And then of course before that, when I was in the Air Force, I learned some things about the stealth aircraft that makes it stealthy that has since, been talked about in open source material and in public stuff. And that has to do with it has to do with what they cover the surface of the aircraft in that contributes to it being stealthy. But back when I learned it, I couldn't even breathe about that.
Wow.
Yeah. And but for the most part, there are still some things that the details when you're in that line of work, you're never able really to talk about, right? Because it's just, you're never given the permission, even though you might see it in open sources. Some things, unless you are specifically given the permission, you can't talk about them, even though everyone else can.
Right. Do you talk about? You think of a TR-3B maybe, or something like that? Oh, you heard of that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've heard of that. Well, I can tell you that when I got to my second assignment to write Patterson, I had to go over to, you'll like this, I had to go over to an Air Force base where the 509th Bomber Group is located.
The famous one.
The famous one. You know who I'm talking about. They, of course, were at Roswell, New Mexico back in the 40s, but they're at Whiteman Air Force Base now in Missouri. And I got to go aboard a B-2. Now, this was in the mid-90s, so at the time, that was still kind of cool to get to go aboard a B-2, and I cannot tell you anything.
Cool. It's still cool.
Yeah, it is still cool, but I can't really talk about anything I saw inside the cockpit of that aircraft. So
Sure. I get that. And I'm sure U.S. and the whole military complex, industrial complex area, they have more than one TR-3B or something.
I would agree with you on that totally. Because my view, even before I entered the Air Force, my understanding, is that, and I was told this by people who had been in, whenever they tell you that we have an aircraft that can do this and do that, that aircraft can always go farther and higher and do more than they tell you it can. And when they tell you that a particular aircraft is the most advanced aircraft we have, you can pretty much count on an aircraft you don't know about, that they're not telling you about, that can do more, that's more advanced and could be upwards to 20 years ahead in its technology. So yeah, the TR-3, this, that, or the other, sure. The Aurora, sure. I
heard that, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I heard the legend of Aurora and TR-3B and the other stuff. I can tell you, if I saw Bomber B-2 now, I would be like, man, I saw an UFO, It's so sci-fi for me, because that's some pretty beautiful aircraft, And it's, and if you when you see it, you think it's brand new, but it's old.
Sure.
You could just imagine what do they have. But
Exactly.
Okay. Please tell us, you had some strange experiences in life. Can you tell us about those experiences? And I know a few years back, I was listening to some of your interviews. You mentioned some experiences with your uncle. Or am I mistaken? Can you tell us anything about that?
He was my mentor, both in my professional life and in the weird stuff, the paranormal stuff and the things that he encouraged me to pursue. It made for some very interesting experiences. I would experience things like I was experiencing personal psychic type, strange phenomena. And he understood what it was I was experiencing, and he tried to help me get a better grasp and focus on what it was, and to try to teach me how to use these abilities, at will. And how to apply the abilities. And in the course of that, he taught me, things that resulted in lucid dreaming techniques, how to harness that, how to read certain literature in a certain way to unlock knowledge and awareness, and also how to, the creepiest thing he ever taught me was necromancy, how to raise dead spirits and communicate with them. Now, for the record, I have not yet achieved that. It kind of weirds me out. And I'm very cautious about that, but he did teach me how to do it, and I did do the first stages and steps of it. But I have not stood before a gravesite and pulled up a spirit and communicated with it.
Sure. But can I ask you, was he aware that wasn't some kind of MK Ultra or something? That was like... Here's what it could have been. It could have been a test of me, a test of my gullibility. It could have been a test of, will I follow instructions, no matter how weird or bizarre they are, or, out of the ordinary or whatever. It absolutely could have been testing me in some ways. It could have been part of, when you're mentoring somebody, you do kind of use some of the same tactics as you would handling a source, right? And it's just the nature of the beast with mentoring people. So it could have been some of that. It could have been just him working me, knowing I had an interest in these things, knowing that was a button he could push, a touchstone. And, he could have been using those themes and those things in that regard. However, I have had enough independent, weird experiences to strongly suggest that wasn't the case, that he really indeed was teaching me how to do something that can be done and expecting me to know how to do that. And that, of course, meaning getting information from dead spirits. Wow. Okay, so can I ask you, was he a government man?
Oh, yes. Yes, yeah. When he finally retired, he had spent 44 years in the U.S. national security community.
44 years.
In the intelligence part of it, he had been U.S. Army before that.
That's a long time. Could only imagine what he knew, what he knows.
Exactly.
Do you think there is a sci-fi movie close to 2001 Odyssey in Space, talking quality? My take is Interstellar, when Christopher Nolan used the knowledge of a Nobel Prize winner physicist Kip Thorne. What does your world look like when we touch the sci-fi realistic cinema topic?
You mean you're saying, for instance, like which movies or? Yeah,
well, which movies do you like or respect?
You okay? So you're asking which films reflect what it's really most like, right?
Yes, that's the question.
I got you. Wow. What's interesting is, I think that, for instance, the Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere is what the X-Files movies wanted to be, but sadly did not deliver. I would strongly recommend, if you haven't seen it.
I have. I love it. I've seen it like 5 times. And
my favorite, to give you a clue, my favorite sequence in that film is when Richard Gere goes to visit the older researcher in New York, played by Alan Bates. And their whole discussion, their whole interchange, that is, to me, the most important segment of the film, what he tells Richard Gere. And I mean, I can watch that segment over and over again. But another thing that you should watch is True Detective season 1. One of the reasons why that really resonated with me was that season. The other 2 seasons are unfortunately nowhere near in its class. But that first season resonated with me because that is exactly, or as close as I've ever seen in a movie or TV thing, to what my experience investigating my Empire of the Wheel books, that mystery, what that was like. It really captured the strange essence of when you're investigating something and you stumble into a much wider, darker,
and
deeper fabric of high strangeness in the background of, a crime. And that's why I can watch that first season over and over. As a matter of fact, I just did it recently and gonna do it again.
I'm gonna do it too.
Yeah, True Detective season 1 is, and another one to throw out there. A character that's always been my favorite. The film from 1980, William Hurt, Altered States, and I didn't. Oh boy,
see that one.
Watch that movie. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, his character, for me, I've always enjoyed William Hurt in movies, but for me, that remains the best character he's ever played. And it's very, very intense, that movie, both in the action and the story, but in the intellectual aspect. So there's a start.
Okay, that's a great start. William Hurt is a great actor, but I can't wait to see it. I will surely see it these days. Thank you for that.
Sure.
When you were active OSI agent for the Air Force, did you have contact? Did you ever have contact with Yugoslavia? And is there anything you could say that is in connection with Balkan or these parts of Europe?
Maybe. What's interesting is I didn't go to that part of the world on my job or really do anything connected directly with that part of the world, that part of Europe, until I was out of the Air Force, but then in counterterrorism. And I had to go to Sarajevo on several occasions. I worked in Mostar. And
really?
I had to go to Croatia next door there.
Sure.
On one occasion, but yeah, Sarajevo I had to go to several times, and Mostar a couple of times.
Oh, great! I'm really near Mostar. It's like
you are okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Montenegro. It's at the edge of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then there's Serbia, and then there's Macedonia, and then there's Albania. So
right.
I'm really near that. I'm like to the seaside more.
Well, you know what's funny? What comes to my mind thinking of Sarajevo and Mostar and that whole area, particularly I stayed in that little area outside of Sarajevo called Ilica.
I know. Yeah.
You know Ilica. And talking about this reminded me of the trout. And last night, my girlfriend and I had what we call here steelhead trout, which is incredible. But it made me think of, us talking about these places, reminded me of all the really great trout I had while I was over in Bosnia,
Yeah. I'm not surprised. Great. I'm really surprised. I thought maybe you didn't see this part of the world, but
no. And I liked it. I liked being in. I was just talking about it last night on my my radio show. It came up last night, so I was talking about Sarajevo and Mostar.
Great. My bass player is from Mostar.
Oh, okay.
So I'm familiar with the place. It's a really cute little town. And
Yeah, it's been several years since I've been to those places, but I've never forgotten them.
that speaks a lot. Really, really surprised nicely. This is a digression a little bit.
Sure.
I know you have a healthy dose of skepticism, but as you have more knowledge about the occult and NASA, what is your take on the secret space program talk?
Okay.
Idea?
Well, it's very simple. I totally am on board with a secret space program, so to speak. However, the distinction that I make is that I reject these claims, of people like Corey Goode, Randy Kramer,
Blue
those
chicken cult.
Yeah, the blue chicken cult stuff, this idea of being transported across time to Mars to fight, the bugs and being in this idea that the secret space program. Yeah. The idea that the secret space program is some Starfleet kind of advance, that's absolutely ridiculous. It's a bunch of nonsense. What I think exists and has existed since the 1950s, at least where the United States is concerned, is a classified manned space program that has really was mostly parallel to what NASA was doing, only they had military objectives. And in fact, I point out that I think that even the technology of the rockets and the craft and everything was parallel up until probably around the late 1970s. And then at that point, I think the classified space program would have started really moving ahead with its spacecraft and its technology to where, when we get to our times, it's going to be about 20, 25, maybe 30 years ahead of what the known space travel technology is, but certainly not this ridiculous stuff that, gets popularly talked about, in these fantasy tales. Yes,
it really sounds like fantasy, but you don't think there is Richard Dolan's phrase, breakaway civilization.
Yes.
Every day looks more real to me. And let us remember that they had that idea in the early X-Files show, as many other things that are real today.
Sure.
You know about the short statement from the late director of the Lockheed Martin, Ben Rich, when he said, now we have the means to take ET home, but the black programs and technology will never see the light of the day. Just the hand of God could do that.
Yeah.
Where do you stand when you talk about black programs and his statement? Do you think it's possible we broke off our solar system?
Oh, I think it's certainly been attempted to a greater extent than merely the Voyager probes. Here's what I think. I find I kind of did a fine tuning of Dolan's definition is excellent, by the way. I just took out the word civilization and put in the word group or society, a breakaway group or a breakaway society, because I think that's more realistic. Civilization is too big of a word. It implies something that just I don't think is the case. But a breakaway group, now, they would live among us. Okay, they're just people with, as Dolan says, basically with the financial and material resources, right?
Okay.
To be able to go do their own things as far as, for example, space technology, goes.
Sure.
So I certainly think those are real. Those exist. I think in our ancient, remote past, there, was a civilization that likely had technology that was able to leave the Earth. I think that I think that a civilization from another planet came here, and their DNA is mixed in all of us. Basically, I think this is this is a planet that has been visited by advanced civilizations for ages and continues to be so. I think that among the beings out there in space on other planets are humans exactly like us. So, they could come and go and we wouldn't know it. They could blend in and move among us and, but just simply be from another planet. However, that doesn't mean I buy all the stories we hear in, ufology world about, the claims people make to be one of these, ET humans and such, or the crazy interactions that we hear talked about popularly.
Yes. Please tell me, what do you think happened to Napoleon when he entered the Great Pyramid of Giza?
I think something truly extraordinary happened to him. His number one closest advisor, mentor, if you will, was a scientist, philosopher scientist, who was also a mathematician. He's the father of modern geometry, or an aspect of geometry. His name was Monge. Excuse me. In his work, there is something called that came to be known as the Monge point. Now, the Monge point is that point where, now this was mathematically expressed, geometrically expressed. The Monge point is the intersection of multiple planes, and a pyramid is the most perfect example of where you find the Monge point. So now apply that to Napoleon having been in Egypt. Monge was with him, and here we have the Great Pyramid. It is my suspicion, my proposition, that Monge had studied that pyramid and came to believe that the Monge point of the Great Pyramid, would have been in the sarcophagus of the king's chamber, that thing we call the sarcophagus. So what I think happened was Napoleon went into the pyramid on the given night that we're told about. I think he probably did it more than once, but at least once. And he spent essentially 6 or 7 hours lying in that box, in that sarcophagus in the king's chamber. And I think what happened to him, I propose what happened to him, was that he had some type of deep psychic link locked into the Monge point, and it showed him extraordinary things. It might have shown him the ancient past. It might have shown him the future or his own future, glimpses of it. But I think what happened was something extraordinary was revealed to him that resulted in incredible insight. So, when he emerged from the pyramid, according to the legend, and he was visibly shaken and wouldn't talk about what he'd seen, I think that's what happened. And I think that had a lot to do with, what he did, what he pursued in the remainder of his life.
Oh, so interesting. A little sub question. Do you have because I know you wrote about this topic, and the famous book, Esoteric Napoleon, that you're author of. Did you think about translating it to the other languages, maybe? Like ours?
We excuse me.
Sure.
Sorry, I had to hit the cough button there.
Cool.
Yes, actually, I am looking into translating it probably first into Spanish, because that will be the easiest one I can do here, right?
Sure.
Get done here with the Spanish linguists. But Spanish, French, Asian language, but certainly I could, throw in, several other languages on the list there. So
that would be great. That would be really great and meaningful. because I know that there are people here who would really enjoy to read it.
Well, that's encouraging. That maybe you'll put that higher on the list there.
It would be great. Yeah, you can trust me on that. Okay, so you were very into the 19th century airship mysteries, and you found out the root of that story. Can you tell us about the Dalshau and those people? I think that there were Germans, right?
Yes.
What was their objective?
Well, it's as far as we know, according to Dalshau, it was to explore this development of what we would call anti-gravity technology. But this was in the 1850s, half a century before the Wright brothers would have their success with an airplane.
Yes.
And but these were not hot air balloons either. I first started hearing about Dalshau in the early 2000s from a friend of mine, and what really made me do a deep dive on it was I've written a trilogy of books under the title Empire of the Wheel, and it has to do with occult murder and World War I espionage and things like that. But something very interesting popped up in that one of a young man who was arrested this all happened here in San Bernardino, California in 1915. He was arrested on a train. He was having a nervous breakdown. He was taken to the psychiatric ward of the local county hospital. And instead of being questioned and them having time to look at him as possibly being involved with these mysterious deaths, possibly murders, he was released into the custody of these people that were only described as friends from Sonora. And when I looked into that, I discovered that it was indeed Sonora, California, that these mysterious unnamed people were identified as being, from that town. And this guy who had been arrested was just released, and they were allowed to take him home to Sonora. And I found out that it was indeed Sonora, California. And immediately I thought of, oh, wait a minute, that's connected to that whole Dalshau thing. So I did my first deep dive into Dalshau at that time, and it just opened a whole world of questions and strangeness for me in that regard. But what I learned was that Charles Dalshau was a German immigrant to the United States in the early 1850s, and he had left behind. He died in 1923. He lived in Texas, and he had left behind diaries and just volumes of these paintings and schematics and drawings of these weird flying machines. And he claimed in his journals that these flying machines were real, and the people he talked about were real, and they were the members of this very secretive group called the Sonora Aero Club. Aero is in aeroplane, AERO. And he claimed that in California, just west of Yosemite National Park,
interesting,
that they had built in secret and flown in secret these flying machines, and they themselves were German immigrants. Now, Dalshau claimed that he had been hired by and sent to the United States, to California, to get to California, to go observe and report on what the Sonora Aero Club was doing, because they were sort of sponsored by this mysterious group that Dalshau called NYMZA, NYMZA.
Oh.
And, so he comes to the United States, he gets out to California, he ends up really getting along with these guys in the Sonora Aero Club, really liking them. And he learns that the German immigrants in the Sonora Aero Club in California, they're not too fond of the NYMZA organization. The NYMZA organization wants them to build military versions of their flying machines, but the Sonora Aero Club does not. Okay. So what happens is when Germany sends their NIMSA representative to go, observe directly and to pitch them on these military flying machines, the Sonora Aero Club rejects that. And it's not long after that, we are told that in a fiery crash, the leader of the Sonora Aero Club is killed. And then the group disbands and that's it. There's no more. However, when you go through the following 30 years of interesting little threads and connections, you end up in the following 30 some going into 40 years, you end up in the 1890s, and there was the great airship mystery of the 1890s. Okay. Now, in a nutshell, the airships of the 1890s were just more sophisticated, larger versions of what the Sonora Aero Club had been doing in the 1850s. And there is a family, this couple of men who were named in the 1890s airship mystery as being involved with building these airships, who have the same last name as a former member of the 1850s Sonora Aero Club. So that's just one of the connections. Okay.
Wow.
Of course, I've pulled threads and it leads into some interesting stuff in the 20th century. But going back to the young man who was arrested on the train in 1915 here in San Bernardino, I wondered what might the airship mystery and the Sonora Aero Club have to do with what happened here in San Bernardino in 1915. And there's all sorts of possibilities. I discuss it in my book, but I still haven't answered the question. But the whole Delschau mystery is really the prologue to the 1890s airship mystery. And I strongly recommend people read a book titled The Secrets of Delschau by a man named Dennis Crenshaw. Also a book, Solving the 1896 Airship Mystery by Michael Busby. Those are the two best books on the mystery.
Oh, so interesting. Thank you for that. I will remember that.
The two books were The Secrets of Delschau by Dennis Crenshaw and Solving the 1896 Airship Mystery by Michael Busby. Those are really the two best places to start on those subjects.
Great. I'll surely look for them, and I hope the listeners are taking notes. So let's talk about Shimmering Light a little. How many books you published until now, and what are you preparing for us?
Oh, wow. At present, I have written, oh my gosh, I think it's 12 or let's see, there's, I think there's 12 that I've authored solo. And then there are, Empire of the Whale 1 I wrote with Rick Spence, but there are two others that I have written with a co-author named Todd Woods. So my personal tally is up to, I think, 14. And I'm in the middle of writing the Esoteric Napoleon Volume 2.
Oh,
presently.
really?
I'm working on the research, deep in the research on that one now.
That's great news. Didn't know that. Great. So your book Shimmering Light is about MK Ultra experiments. Am I right? And
that's part of it. Definitely, it talks about MK Ultra and Roswell and Operation Paperclip. And a couple of other things, all within the context of my father's service in the U.S. Air Force.
So can I ask you, what was your father's job?
My dad was, he joined the Air Force in 1955. He got out in December, if I'm not mistaken, Christmas Eve of 1958. He got out early. Honorable discharge. That's very important here in the States. He was in what they call the aerospace medicine division, and that has everything to do with, did then and still does, but it had everything to do with the pursuit of putting man in space. See, in the States, the U.S. Air Force was the first government organization that was at the head of pursuing manned space travel. This was before NASA was created. And my dad, what he did specifically was he was part of training agents in dealing with high altitude life support equipment. But at the same time, in his specialty, the guys who did what he did, they would test pressure suits, the precursors to space suits. As a matter of fact, his unit was involved with testing the silver spacesuits that were used in the Mercury program. They would do the ground testing. Yeah, because they would do ground testing in altitude chambers before they would, put anybody up in the sky or in space in those things. And because he did stuff that was connected to early manned space travel within the military context, it was very classified, and he had to have a pretty high clearance. Sure. And the book focuses on a particular point in his service that he started telling me about in 1974 when I was just, 10 years old. Okay. And it involved him being briefed according to him. He was briefed on what happened in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. And he was, according to his story, he was told that what they were, who they were, where they were really from. And now this was in 1958. And he was told it had happened again. And he and the guys that were being briefed on this were then flown out to Arizona on this, basically a search and rescue, because apparently a craft from this other civilization had crashed out in the desert. They had reason to believe that their pilot was still alive, and they had come to the U.S., officials, military, whatever, to request help in getting their pilot back home. This was the story my dad told, that he was told as he understood it. Now, in my book, I take, again, this phrase, I take a deep dive on his career and on the history of the Air Force and what else was going on back then in the space program. And in my book, Shimmering Light, I offer his story as he told it consistently for decades to me. I offer his story and the possibilities of what it could actually have been. In other words, I present whatever evidence there is that supports his story as he told it. On the face of it, I also present evidence of that the story he told was some type of false narrative laid in his psyche in order to suppress him talking about what he was really doing. A classified project. And I get into the fact that the Air Force in the 50s was doing its own independent MK Ultra research and applications separate from CIA. And I get into how and why this would have been applied to personnel like my dad working on the things that he may have been working on. And that's what the book explores. But I do say that my dad, he passed away several years ago now, in 2008, and he told what he believed was the truth. Okay, so he went to his grave believing that the superficial, that what he was telling me was the actual truth.
So he never changed the story.
He never changed the story, and I started getting more out of him when my mentor, I had become an Air Force officer, and my mentor encouraged me to talk to him about this and to draw more out, and gave me information that my dad wasn't giving me, and I was able to confirm what I was told by the mentor in my continued talks with my dad. And I learned what we call subject interview skills, not exactly interrogation, but, how to talk with people, how to interview them, and
Yes.
to gently really be interrogating them and getting them to reveal things. And by the time, I had learned those skills and was using them in my job. So yes, I applied them to my conversations with my dad. Because
understand.
that's how you determine if someone's telling you the truth and such. But that's a whole other discussion. But so Shimmering Light is my exploration of my dad's story that Roswell had nothing to do with ETs, that there is a civilization living in the subterranean areas of this planet, and they have a technology which in some regards is more advanced than ours, and their craft, when going from the subterranean world into space, had crashed on the surface. And this was my dad's story. This is what he firmly stated, was true, that he had learned. And, I decided, what, after all these years, I finally needed to dive into that. So I did, and Shimmering Light is the result of my analysis and investigation.
Can't wait to buy the book. Really, everything I know about it is from your interviews. So I think it's time for me to buy it. To read the
you'll
book.
like it. It's one of my personal favorites. I think I did a particularly good job, and I'm very enthused by the hypotheses that I present. And I just don't think that book gets enough attention, considering what's in it.
Surely, I'm surely it doesn't. I heard even Joseph Farrell talked about that book, and not just that book, but he really encourages people to read it.
Yeah, and because Joseph Farrell and I are of the same mind. In the popular UFO community, if you talk about Roswell in any context other than extraterrestrials, you get a bunch of reaction.
It's unpopular.
People don't want to hear it, but it's too bad, because the inconvenient truth about Roswell is that it had nothing to do with extraterrestrials, most likely, but they don't want to hear that because that's still the popular thing. And there's still enough people that have, their livelihoods, their income is connected to Roswell being an ET thing. So they certainly don't want it to be anything else. But.
Sure. I can see that. In the 1950s, from Boeing, from the companies like Boeing and bigger companies all the way to MIT, everybody was frantically into the anti-gravitics and the technology that would give us better life, and then they suddenly all stopped to even talk about it. What happened from your perspective after 20 years working as an intelligence agent?
Well, even without that, just studying it on the face of it and how these things work, and when you dive under the surface of it and you look at the history of all that, I agree with some others in our community that I think the reason they stopped talking about it was they figured it out. They figured out how to do it, and they started applying it. So naturally, they had to put a lid on that. So I think that's the big clue there, that they have, to whatever degree they're keeping from us, they had an anti-gravity breakthrough back then. And think about how many decades ago now. We're talking, roughly 70 years now of development. Who knows how far they've gotten with that. In fact, I would say that a lot of things people are convinced, once again, here we go, a lot of things people are seeing and reporting that they're convinced are coming from another world is very Earth-based technology.
Interesting point of view, really. I want the people to know you a little bit better. So I want to get back a little bit. Can you tell us about the occult in Napoleon Bonaparte's life? Maybe a bit more.
Yeah. essentially, Napoleon Bonaparte, his first love was ancient history and lost civilizations and really what we would call weird science, the philosopher science stuff. And
Yes.
what I mean by that is you have to understand how the culture of science, how it's been affected by one particular year. In 1830, the Royal Society of England and its satellites, they had been founded by what we used to call philosopher scientists. These were men like Isaac Newton and such, Edmund Halley, and they were material scientists, but at the same time, they were also philosopher scientists. They dabbled in alchemy.
Sure.
They were enthusiastic and expert with, arcane notions. Okay. But then you had your pure materialists. And up until 1830, the materialist scientists, the bean counters, I call them, the specialists, they were always outnumbered by the philosopher scientists who founded the very organizations that they were in. And these philosopher scientists had a better grasp of things in general, okay? They might have been primarily a mathematician or an astronomer or whatever, but they had a pretty good grasp of the bigger picture. Well, the so-called specialists, they didn't like that. They didn't like, because they were experts in one thing. They didn't like the philosopher scientists because basically the philosopher scientists knew more than they did. Well, by 1830, unfortunately, the bean-counting materialist scientists finally outnumbered the philosopher scientists in the Royal Societies, and they simply, essentially with a vote, took control of the Royal Societies and therefore got the upper hand in professional science, right? So since 1830, we've had these materialists who are also atheistic, just specialist scientists. You'll notice the rise of the expert. We live in a society wherein people are always deferring to the experts, right?
Oh, yes.
And how many times now are we seeing the so-called experts misleading us, driving us down the wrong road, or hiding things from us, okay? The other thing that the change in 1830 resulted in was careerism in science and academia especially, so that the materialist scientists are much more concerned with their personal careers than the philosopher scientists ever were. I mean, they had concern for certain things, but the materialist scientists, the professional scientists of the day, the majority of them, they're much more concerned about careerism. Now, the other problem with the materialist experts and specialists are they know their little niche, their little slice really well, but they're not very good with other perspectives because that's not their bailiwick. Now, the people that want to keep secrets from us, this is perfect for them because they can manipulate these guys. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Napoleon, he was much more interested in the philosopher scientist perspective. Okay. He had great respect for these guys that were open to the extraordinary, that were open more to the extraordinary than materialist scientists. Okay. And these are the people he would surround himself with. And this was his first love, this kind of thing. Now, remember, 1830 was, after his time, we are told that, Napoleon had been, a prisoner for a while by, the 1830s. And as accomplished as he was as the emperor of France and as a military commander, he was a brilliant military tactician and strategist, and he's still studied to this day. His first love was this philosopher scientist stuff, the ancient mysteries and things like that. And so he was very open to these concepts, things like, psychic abilities. He was very much a meditator. He was very into, by his own admission, very into intense meditation.
Oh,
well, he
didn't know that.
Yes. And so now go back to that night he spends in the pyramid. And if he's a seasoned meditator, he has the skills honed and polished to be able to, take his mind to an alpha state, if you will, pretty quickly. And so that's why the idea that he was able to lock his mind, his psyche, his consciousness into whatever this mange point of the Great Pyramid was, it becomes even more intriguing. But I would say that from my studies so far, from what I have looked at, I would say that he was mostly keenly interested in the lost secrets of past civilizations. And I argue in my book that he switched places with his brother Joseph and lived here in the United States under his brother's name, Joseph Bonaparte. And that's just not me pulling that out of the air. That is something that several other historians have suspected. And at the time it was suspected. In I'm doing a brain dump. The year that Waterloo happened,
I'm not sure.
15, I want to say. I can't believe I'm doing a brain dump on the year of Waterloo. But anyway, back then it was suspected because his brother offered to do that to him, and witnesses that were there reported that. And so I, in my book, flesh out that possibility that they switched places and that it was Joseph who was on St. Helena and it was Napoleon himself who came to the United States. We are told Joseph Bonaparte came to the United States in 1815 and spent much of the rest of his life here. I say that was Napoleon. And I present why I think that. And again, I reiterate, I'm not the only person that was proposed long before I ever was around. I just happen to agree with it and present the evidence to suggest it.
Okay. So deep. I will surely look into it. And now a little digression. I'm like jumping from question to question, like a bee from flower to flower, but the juice is the same thing. What's your take about the assassination of the President of the United States of America, John F. Kennedy?
Oh, I'm right there with. I'm sure you're familiar with Daniel List, also known as Dark Journalist. And, and Joseph Farrell and Jim Mars and everyone that has looked at it closely. Of course, it was a conspiratorial plot. I think that Lyndon Johnson was the witting beneficiary of it. Lyndon Johnson was not a good man. But I think he was a witting beneficiary. And as Joseph Farrell points out, the one group among all the suspects that would have pulled it off, the one group that is connected to all the other suspects.
Please don't tell me the brothers.
The post-war Nazis.
Oh.
Okay. The post-war Nazis that
came to America,
came to the United States, Operation Paperclip, helped build our military industrial complex, and were involved in what Joseph Farrell calls the Nazi International. The war era Nazis, of course, you mentioned I think you're referring to the Dulles brothers.
Of course.
Allen Dulles, who was running the CIA, through Reinhard Gehlen's spy network post-war. He had his connections to the Nazis, but Nazis,
Kennedy fired him before he died.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And so, I mean, it's the one group that among all the suspects, be it the mafia, the Cubans, the this, that, or the other, the Nazis are the one that each one of those have a link to. The Nazis are the only one of those that have a link to all the others. So that and other evidence, like Alan Dulles being put on the Warren Commission, hello.
Yes.
I agree with Joseph Farrell specifically that it was a Nazi international cabal that did that to JFK for multiple reasons. They wanted to get rid of him because of what he was doing, but they also wanted to do really an MK Ultra style, mind game, terrorism on the American public.
Sure. But what the Alan Dulles, for example, what was he what was he gaining from all of that, and what was his connection to the Nazis?
Power.
Okay.
At some point Dulles had been corrupted, whether it was during his OSS days or not until after the CIA was formed, but at some point Dulles in his life had been corrupted, and just like Prescott Bush, had been involved. He was going to be indicted by the U.S. government for colluding with the Nazis during the war because they were providing Nazi Germany with banking services and such. I mean, this is the father of President Bush 1 and the grandfather of President Bush 2. But that's that whole thing about the Bush political family. I mean, wow, that's a whole other discussion.
Sure, of course. That's really it would take hours just that topic to cover.
A guy like Alan Dulles, in the position he was in, benefits from a military-industrial complex because a group like the CIA is the really the investigative arm of a military-industrial complex. So
yes.
There you go. But power, I think it was the power that
the ultimate
was his
drug.
push button. Yeah.
So sad. I heard even Joseph Farrell told once. I really liked that sentence. Like he was talking about the politics in the U.S. and the now, and he told something like it was the U.S. of America was kidnapped in 1962 when John F. Kennedy died, and
63, yeah,
63.
Yeah.
My mistake. And he was really changing things globally. Unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree with Joseph's basic assessment. It began with Operation Paperclip. I'm convinced that Operation Paperclip was the brainchild of the Germans who were brought over. And when you look at the history of it, it had more to do with, this is what's interesting. Go back to that aerospace medicine I was talking about of the U.S. military, the U.S. Air Force. It was the aviation medicine scientists who initiated Operation Paperclip with these German counterparts that they knew and had been working with prior to the war. And I'm convinced that the idea for Operation Paperclip likely came from a German or this group of Germans. And this was how the so-called, what Joseph calls the Nazi International, I think this is how they first infected the United States government structure through this military organization. And in the intervening years between Operation Paperclip and the assassination of John F. Kennedy, what they did was they positioned themselves, they used their power, they built they really built up our military industrial complex into the model that's very Nazi in its vision. And so that by the time Eisenhower was getting out of office, he realized this is a dangerous thing. Something bad's happening here. And of course, Kennedy was the first president who took the opportunity to buck up against them. And you see what they did to him. And so I agree with Joseph. 1963 was their coup. That was their big coup move. And, they've been controlling the essential things since then.
Yeah, of course. And I 100% agree with you and Joseph. And what's the sense you get like this in our time of that power structure, Nazis?
Well, what I think it is
where all that power went. What happened to America?
Okay. Well, here's how I've started to look at it. We might want to, we use the term Nazi because there's the convenient historical reference there so that people know what we're talking about. But really, when you're talking about what Joseph means and is talking about, it is a culture, a very small, controlling culture that has its roots going back into the medieval era in Germany. And by the time we get to the 20th century, the whole Nazi party and the Nazi thing emerges from it and is, up until that time, or by that time, it is the most, the closest to the purest expression of what this culture that I'm talking about. So at the point in the war when this particular control culture, that's what we'll call it, the control culture, when they realize Germany's going to get its butt kicked, they're going to lose this war, it's time for us to move into our next host. You see, they operate like a parasite. And so they decide the host has got to be the group that comes in and helps beat Germany, happens to be the United States, right?
Right.
So they see the coming industrial prowess. They see that machine turned on for the war effort. They see the resources. They see the promise for this new host. So like a parasite, they find their way into the body, and their way into the body is Operation Paperclip. Okay, so they get themselves, they infect the United States through Operation Paperclip, and they initially, this is the way they function and had for centuries, they befriend the host. They do things that are good for the host, right? They make the host powerful, all the while positioning themselves like bacteria in the essential organs of the host. Okay. In this case, we're talking about the military. We're talking about the intelligence agencies. We're also talking about what? The government, the courts, academia, media, you name it. Okay. These are the organs of the host. And once they infect all the organs of the host, then they begin to really start controlling that host, trying to control it like a puppet. Okay, and any organs that reject that control have to be excised. So JFK had to be excised because he was resisting them. Now, in their minds, you got to look at it this way. What we call the Nazis, it was the purest expression of what this control culture is, what their vision is. But you got to look at it as the Nazi label is the thing of the past, because they certainly call themselves something else. They still are the control culture. They still have the same vision, but now what have they done? They've applied it to globalism, global corporatism. Okay.
Yes.
That's what Nazism really was the first modern distillation, I guess, of what really is just corporate globalism. That's what I meant to say. So they have become the globalists. And what's weird is they have this weird, a similar agenda to the Marxist globalists, even though they would be rivals. But they'll find a way. They've probably infiltrated them as well. So that's how I look at Joseph Farrell's Nazi International, is a control culture that has figured out some certain things along the way, also influencing public perception, doing mind games on entire populations. And they mastered that in the 20th century, and we got it with MK Ultra.
So, can I ask you a sub question about that?
Sure.
How do we fight it? How do we fight this culture who is like a transforming organism and infected for a long time ago the whole world?
That's the thing that most people don't want to hear, because the population, the free peoples of the world, to whatever degree you're free, the free peoples of the world have also been lulled with bread and circuses. Yes. The consumer economy has created a culture wherein, you know, the common man just wants their comforts. They don't want their leisure time to be burdened with any serious tasks or any serious thoughts. You know, only happy thoughts, only happy dreams. They want to go do their jobs, get their paychecks, and be left alone. And so, unfortunately, your question is, how do we fight this? Well, we're going to have to fight it the way the globalist radicals do things, and people are going to have to stand up. They're going to have to resist, but that scares people because it requires a commitment that is not a popular thing. And but lesser things can be done. What we can do is start, really fighting properly the war of ideas. Start, books, movies, TV shows, news reports. Yes. In other words, get out there in the media and just keep on talking about this stuff, exposing it, expose it in dramatic tellings, expose it in documentary tellings, just constantly be exposing this, be politically active and vote for the right people. Stop just being robots and voting along party lines. Really study the individuals and vote for, in other words, cast off party affiliation, because they have manipulated party affiliation, around the world. Parties are it's a lure, it's a trap. Start thinking like an individual, vote for individuals, get involved, on the local level. Just being ever vigilant against these people is the best first way to fight them, because they're winning just simply through, various levels of mind control and perception management. They're masters of this. So, keeping your wits about you and being active and involved. But again, we're asking for people who have gained a society where they're not having to work 24/7 just to get food to survive. We're talking about, what is called the first world, the people that have the luxuries and they have the comfort zone. They really don't want that interrupted.
Yes.
And that's what makes
so
us
sad.
Sitting targets for the globalists.
Oh, yeah.
Because it all comes down to these human beings who want to rule the world and tell everybody else what they will do, or they will eliminate us. That's what it comes down to.
Unfortunately. Let's go for just one question.
Sure.
Okay?
Yeah, we got time for one more.
Okay. Can you give us some sense of being an FBI agent or working for Air Force? My father was a helicopter pilot, and
oh, cool.
and listen to this, because we talked about Nazis a bit.
Yeah.
Was it the Davis, or what was the Nazi guy, the general that was like a director later in Bell Helicopters?
Oh boy.
It was some big dude.
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and I'm forgetting who. I know who you're talking about. But the name
never mind. It's just funny that my father flew Bell helicopters. Only. Sure. It's funny, and I would love to hear, what do you have to say about your experience as an FBI agent or Air Force?
Well, I was an agent for the Air Force. I was an operative for the FBI. I was in counterintelligence. I was an operative when I worked for the FBI. But then when I went into the Air Force, I went into officer training school, earned my commission. and then it was served as a special agent of the Air Force OSI. So I was both a military agent and a federal agent for the U.S., and it's pretty cool. It's a really cool job, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Here in our structure, in our, particularly in our law enforcement community, the federal agents are the top guys, really, as far as jurisdiction and things go, of course. Now, I was, see, in our culture over here, your local police force, basically the police officers over here, they've sometimes have had a mixed experience with federal agents. Unfortunately, some federal agents will come in on a local thing and boss them around and act like jerks. And so that's why you get this attitude of, oh God, the feds are here. But I can say that my experience was not like that, because when you're doing national security stuff like spy chasing, spy hunting, the local police departments, they generally don't ever get involved with stuff like that. So when you come in and say you have some type of spy case and you need their help, they like you because you're bringing them in to do something really exciting to them that they don't normally get to do, and you're not coming in acting like a jerk. So I was one of the good guy federal agents as far as cops were concerned, right? Because I wasn't coming in to lord it over them and act like a jerk. So
glad to hear that.
Yeah, and just like anywhere in the world, when you have your federal agents, that there's a lot of that badge gets a lot of respect when you have to show it in a situation. People are usually depending upon your demeanor,
of course.
And in the era I was in, I think there was still some deserved trust. Nowadays, unfortunately, due to deep state and the things that have been done in the last 20 some years, people are justifiably cautious around federal agent types,
Yes.
But the job is, I'll tell you, when you're doing it right, you're doing a righteous mission, the job is really cool. I loved it. I liked the travel. I liked the things I got to do. I liked the things I learned. And I felt it was important, because I wasn't only just doing things to protect my own country. I'm doing things to protect our allies, and other, and yeah, that's the way I looked at it. I was doing things to, protect my own country, but in general, free societies and free thinking around the world, right?
Sure.
So that's the way I looked at it. Now, whether that's accurate or not, you gotta look at situation to situation. I have my cynicisms now about what my government has done, particularly with these kinds of agencies. So I don't blame folks, elsewhere having those same, suspicions and concerns also. I'm with you on that. But it was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed aspects of that work. And it was it was important work, but I enjoyed it too. It was fun.
That's great. I could only imagine. Can I ask you only one question?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
It's a bit of digression again, but I must ask you this. I'm really curious. Did you ever hear about the missing 411 and David Paulides?
Oh, yes.
Okay, so just tell me this. What do you think? What is it behind all of these missing people, weirdly missing people? Is it the government, the state, or something unnatural? Because it really seems that is something not really. You don't see something like that really.
I think it's something natural and ultra natural, supernatural, we would call it, but I don't, that I think it's something natural that the state is aware of. Okay. I think there's some type of extraordinary phenomena involved. I don't lean towards the Bigfoot thing. I don't lean towards necessarily UFOs.
Sure.
But I do think something, what we would call weird, is going on. And I definitely think that the government knows what it is. Now, it could be something more mundane, in some cases, but there are certain cases where it's just too weird. And there's multiple possibilities. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, whatever it is that's going on, I do think our government knows what it is and they don't want to reveal it.
That's the best explanation I've ever heard about it, because the reason I ask you this, because you know that FBI agents don't show up in missing persons cases, but
generally not. Yeah.
In these cases, there were many times that FBI agents were on the spot, and that was weird.
Sure. Now, keep in mind though that that most of these cases, if they happen in national parks, that's federal property. So, if there was some more mundane concern going on federal property, the FBI would show up if the person missing is a part of the case. But because it's federal property, it could be that our Department of Interior or our Forestry Division agents requested FBI help, or maybe if the FBI is already working a case that involves somebody doing bad things to people and abducting them in another national park, and then it happens in a different national park, then the agents working that existing case would go to the additional national park to further investigate to see if there's a connection. So that could explain in a more mundane way why the FBI shows up. But then again, the FBI showing up could also be part of there's something weird going on.
Yeah, and that the thing you said, the government knows about it.
Yes.
Because every time the FBI agents showed up, I looked into this. It was really awkward, because even the policemen didn't know quite why are they here, or it's perplexing. But I do think there's something legitimately you said it, ultra natural.
Not either that or something that's not ordinary. Even if it is mundane, it's not an ordinary case of the mundane, and it's something that the government is concerned about enough to want to not say anything about. It's material definitely worth looking at for those who never have.
Sure. Okay, Walter. Thank you for a great conversation.
Sure.
I really look forward to talking to you again.
Yes, let's send me a message and we'll work out another date in the future down the road here, and we'll take a couple of hours.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.